The crystal wine glass slipped from my fingers and shattered against the polished walnut table at the exact moment the ochre envelope was slammed down in front of me. Shards scattered like ice across the linen, and a sharp sting bloomed in my palm as a thin ribbon of blood welled up and slid toward my wrist. I barely noticed. The pain in my hand was insignificant compared to the cold, suffocating weight tightening around my chest as more than 24 faces turned in my direction. No one bothered to hide it. Curiosity sat openly in their eyes, mixed with a quiet, almost indulgent satisfaction. My name is Ella, and this Thanksgiving dinner at my in-laws' house had become something I would never forget. "What's this?" I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded despite the tremor in my hand as I reached for the envelope. "Divorce papers," Brandon said. My husband's voice fell heavy and final, like a judge's gavel striking wood, calm, detached, as if he were announcing that dessert would be late. Before I could process the words, Mildred, my mother-in-law, lifted her glass, took a measured sip of wine, and placed it back down with an air of absolute authority. "We felt it would be kinder to handle this with the family present," she said, each syllable precise and deliberate. Kinder for whom? The question lodged itself painfully in my throat as my gaze shifted to Julie, Brandon's sister, who watched me over the rim of her glass with a satisfied smirk, as though she had rehearsed this moment in her head for years. "You filed for divorce at Thanksgiving dinner?" I repeated slowly, each word scraping its way out. "Sweetheart," Mildred replied, her cool eyes scanning me like a flaw in fabric, "everyone here knows you were never truly right for this family." Under the table, Lindsay's hand found mine and squeezed hard. My best friend, the only reason I hadn't turned around and walked out the second I sensed something was wrong. I looked down at my plate, at the carefully arranged turkey, the glossy cranberry sauce, the warm rolls, and nausea rolled through me. I had never felt so exposed, so deliberately humiliated, and they weren't even pretending otherwise. "Oh, please," Julie added lightly, her tone dripping with contempt. "That little art studio behind the house, everyone knows it's just your excuse for not getting a real job." This time, laughter bubbled freely around the table. Even a few cousins I'd once thought neutral couldn't hide their amusement. I searched Brandon's face for anything familiar, a flicker of guilt, a trace of the man who once spent weekends helping me repaint my studio walls. But he wouldn't meet my eyes. He looked past me as if I were already gone. "We're only trying to help you face reality," Mildred said, dabbing her lips with a spotless napkin. "This family needs someone more substantial." I drew in a slow breath. Beneath the tablecloth, my fingers brushed my purse. Inside rested a document I had guarded for nearly a year, a house deed, signed over to me on a night Brandon barely remembered, when celebration and alcohol blurred his judgment. He'd forgotten, I hadn't. "You're right," I said quietly as I pushed back my chair and stood, blood dripping onto the pristine tablecloth. "I don't belong in this family. I'm far above your standards." Brandon's head snapped up. "What?" Before he could say more, I turned to Lindsay. "Can you take me to the hospital?" I asked calmly, holding up my bleeding hand. Then I looked at Mildred. "And you may want to treat that tablecloth quickly. Bloodstains set if you wait too long, much like deed transfers." Cutlery clattered. "What deed transfer?" Mildred asked, her voice faltering for the first time. I smiled. It was small, restrained, and cold enough to drain the warmth from the room. "Happy Thanksgiving," I said softly. "This may be the last meal you ever have in this house." Then I walked away, ignoring the scraping chairs, the raised voices, Brandon calling my name. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. What mattered was stopping the bleeding and beginning what I had planned long before tonight. Lindsay drove fast through the quiet suburbs, amber streetlights streaking past as I pressed a napkin to my throbbing hand. The physical pain was nothing compared to the release inside me, something that had been cracking quietly for years and had finally split open. At the emergency clinic, the doctor cleaned the wound and stitched my palm. 6 stitches. I didn't flinch. In my mind, I was already someone else, not the quiet Harrington wife, just Ella, the only person at that table who stood when everyone expected her to stay seated. Later, at Lindsay's apartment, I opened my phone and found a draft email I'd written months earlier. Gloria McDaniel, property attorney. Subject line, unchanged. Property at 118 Willow. The time has come. I hit send. The next morning, Lindsay watched me pour water into a glass. "Are you sure?" she asked gently. I met her eyes, grateful for the one person who had never mocked my dreams, who had quietly supported me through long nights in the studio. "I've been quiet long enough," I said. "Now they get to listen." Gloria arrived soon after, composed and focused, carrying a thick folder that radiated confidence. "What's first?" I asked. "We confirm ownership," she said, opening the file to the signed deed. "Then we issue a 30-day eviction notice." I nodded. There was no hesitation left. That evening, I returned to the estate, not as a daughter-in-law, as the owner. The house loomed silently as I pulled in. I rang the bell. Brandon opened the door, shock written across his face. "Ella, about yesterday." "This isn't about yesterday," I said, handing him the papers. "It's about the last 6 years." Inside, the Harringtons sat stiffly, their confidence gone. "You have 30 days, I said evenly. "This house has been mine for nearly a year." No one laughed, no one mocked me. I left them there, surrounded by uncertainty. That night, I didn't sleep. I opened my laptop and revisited a plan I had once drafted in quiet hope: an art gallery, a sanctuary, a place for work dismissed and abandoned. The Haven. The next days moved fast. Calls, plans, Professor Bennett, restoration studios, press releases. Interest poured in, validation followed. By the time the grand hall stood stripped and waiting to be reborn, I felt lighter than I had in years. Late one afternoon, as sunlight filled the space where the Harrington dining table once stood, the gate buzzer sounded. Marcus's voice came through the radio. "Miss Ella, there's a man at the gate. Brandon Harrington. Says it's urgent." I glanced at the clock. 9 a.m. The kind of hour Brandon would pick. Too early for a casual visit, too late for a sincere apology. "Let him in," I said calmly, "but only to the outdoor guest area. He's not to enter the house." 5 minutes later, I stepped on the porch. Brandon was there, hands in the pockets of his overcoat, face drawn, eyes bloodshot, either from sleepless nights or from realizing he'd lost something that couldn't be undone. "Thanks for seeing me," he said, his voice deeper than I remembered. "You have 5 minutes," I replied, arms crossed. He swallowed hard. "Julie, she's pregnant." I raised an eyebrow. "And that concerns me, how?" "We were planning to move back in this spring. This house, it's been in our family for 4 generations. Julie's child should be born here to carry on the tradition." I laughed a short laugh, not mocking, but certainly not empathetic. "You want the child to grow up in a house where his mother laughed in my face when I presented my first artwork at dinner." Brandon stayed silent. "You want him playing in the garden where your mother made me pull weeds all summer just so I look like a proper homemaker, Ella?" He stepped forward, but I didn't move. "No, Brandon, I don't need another explanation." I pulled a fully approved floor plan of the Haven from my coat pocket, stamped and signed by the city. "This house is being renovated into a community art center. It's funded, legally supported, and scheduled to open next month. All documents are in order." He took the papers, flipping through a few pages before looking up at me. "My mother will never agree to this." "Your mother," I said, voice firm, "no longer has a say here." That afternoon, I was checking the gallery's lighting system when my phone buzzed. Unknown number, but I didn't need caller ID. Mildred's voice cut through, sharp as ever. No pleasantries. "I'm requesting a meeting immediately." "I'm no longer under any legal obligation to meet you, Mrs. Harrington." "You don't understand the consequences," she said, and for the first time I detected urgency beneath her commanding tone. "This family has influence. You won't be left in peace if you dismantle tradition like this." I smiled slightly, but without softness. "I'm not dismantling tradition. I'm building a new one, more human, more open, and not rooted in disdain." Then I hung up. The next day, Mildred actually showed up, but this time she couldn't get in. From the security camera, I saw her in a black cashmere coat standing at the gate, gesturing at Marcus. Marcus stayed firm. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Harrington, Miss Ella doesn't take unscheduled visitors. If you need to submit documents, we have a secure drop box at the gate." She stared directly into the camera, as if trying to burn a hole through the screen, and I stood there, right in front of the monitor, watching her, the woman who once controlled every inch of this house, now halted by a gate for which only I had the key. That evening, I received an email from the Harringtons' lawyer, an offer to buy back the house at twice its market value. I replied with one sentence: "I'm not interested in money. I'm interested in purpose." I leaned back in my chair, gazing at the large wall where the centerpiece for the grand opening would soon hang. Soft amber light illuminated the unfinished sketch, shards of glass arranged into butterfly wings, a symbol of something once shattered, now taking flight. They could be angry, they could resist, they could offer as much money as they wanted, but the one thing they could never reclaim was the voice. And for the first time in my life, I knew I had taken it back. On opening night, the Haven radiated warmth against the gray chill of winter. Golden lights spilled across the exposed brick walls, highlighting each piece of art lining the main hallway, once the stately foyer of the Harrington estate. The very people who once called this place a family legacy could never have imagined that one day it would echo with applause from artists across the city. I stood behind a small backstage curtain set up inside the gallery space, fingers lightly gripping a glass of water, my index finger twisting the edge of a napkin. With every passing minute, more guests arrived: reporters, collectors, curators from major museums, and even a few familiar faces who had once rejected my submission packets 3 years ago. Lindsay approached in a deep emerald velvet dress she'd had tailored just for this night. "You have to see it out there. There's a line around the block, and Channel 6 just set up a camera by the stairs." I nodded, saying nothing. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from knowing this time I had nothing left to lose. Outside, the docent began the guided tour of the first piece. I heard footsteps on the hardwood floors, camera shutters clicking, and soft murmurs. "This is incredible. Who would have thought this was once a private mansion?" At exactly 8 o'clock, a soft chime rang, signaling the start of the speeches. I stepped out, the spotlight catching the wooden podium where I now stood, facing a full gallery. "Thank you all for coming tonight," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. This place was once filled with silence, forced expectations, and whispered judgment. But tonight it is handed over to stories that are real, uncensored, and unapologetic. I turned toward the large painting in the center, still covered by a black cloth. This piece was created over the course of a year, through sleepless nights, moments of doubt, and times when I thought I wasn't strong enough to continue. I gave the signal. 2 staff members gently pulled the cloth away. Behind it stood a massive painting: oil, fragments of old newspapers, and shards of broken glass, assembled into glimmers of light. At the center, a flipped dining table, shattered crystal glasses, and mirrored pieces reflecting dozens of faces: pain, anger, helplessness, and finally, in the center, a woman standing tall, holding a paintbrush, her gaze steady and forward-facing. "Reclamation," I said. "Not just art, it's dignity, it's voice, it's me." The room went silent, then applause, at first scattered, then rising wave after wave. A critic from the Boston Review approached, requesting an exclusive interview. A collector from New York leaned toward Lindsay and whispered, "I want to buy the original. Name the price." In the midst of the crowd, the front door unexpectedly opened. All eyes turned. Mildred Harrington entered, back straight, eyes unyielding. Behind her were Brandon and Julie, her pregnancy now unmistakable. "I thought this was a public space," Mildred said coldly. "Of course," I replied, stepping forward with a smile. "Everyone's welcome, even those who once called art a cheap pastime." The room stirred. Reporters turned their cameras. "You've used the Harrington name to stage a personal scandal," she snapped. "You've disgraced my family's legacy." "I didn't disgrace your tradition," I said calmly. "I simply told the truth of what I lived through art." I gestured to the central piece.
This is truth. This is my voice, and for the first time, it's being heard. Mildred opened her mouth to respond, but another round of applause cut her off. From the corner, a silver-haired man stepped forward, the lead curator from the New England Museum of Fine Arts. "Mrs. Harrington," he said, "your son should be proud. We're considering this piece for next year's exhibit, Women and the Voice." After silence, Mildred clutched her purse, silent. Julie lowered her head. Brandon quietly stepped back. I said nothing more. I simply turned to Lindsay and raised my glass. "What are we toasting to?" she asked. "The words that once broke me," I said, "now the foundation of something new." And when I looked back, the spotlight once again hit the painting, its broken glass catching the light like fractured rainbows across the ceiling. This wasn't revenge. This was rebirth. Monday morning, I was in my second-floor office at the Haven, flipping through exhibit contracts from a gallery in Seattle, when my phone buzzed. It was Lindsay, her voice barely a whisper in shock. "Ella, turn on the TV, Channel 9, it's about the Harringtons." I reached for the remote, hands trembling slightly. The bright red headline scrolled across the bottom of the screen. "Harrington Capital under investigation for financial misconduct. Millions missing." The anchor spoke gravely. "Sources say Mildred Harrington, head of the firm, and her son Brandon are under suspicion for using client funds for personal investments, including leveraging properties, one of which is the family estate on Willow Creek." I froze. My heartbeat pounded, not out of joy but a cold realization. If I hadn't filed the ownership transfer in time, everything I built could have vanished like a house of cards. The phone rang again. This time it was Gloria, my lawyer. "Ella, I checked."
Good thing you filed early. Otherwise, that property would have been listed in the FBI's asset seizure file. I exhaled, looking out the window to the front garden where a few students were setting up for the afternoon's restoration class. "What about Brandon?" "Cooperating with investigators," Anne said. "Seems he's blaming everything on his mother." I nodded slowly, not surprised. That night, I was applying a sealant coat to a 19th century frame when my phone rang. The caller ID? I hesitated, then picked up. "Ella." Her voice was nearly unrecognizable. I have nowhere else to go." I said nothing. Julie paused, then continued, choking up. "Brandon's cut me off. My mother's been subpoenaed, and I'm about to give birth. Now I have no home, no money, no one." I was silent. The memories returned. Her mocking smile during my first exhibit, her laughter when Mildred called me too plain for art. "I'm not asking for much, but if there's any guest room, I'll pay later, just somewhere to sleep until the baby comes." Her voice cracked. "Please, not for me, for the child." I looked at my hands, still smudged with paint, the same hands that once trembled as I was handed divorce papers over Thanksgiving dinner, but now they were building something that mattered. I took a deep breath. "The guest house behind the garden is empty. I'll reset the code. You can stay until you find another way." Julie was silent. Then came a quiet sob on the other end of the line. 3 hours later, an old silver car pulled up to the Haven. I opened the gate. Julie stepped out, visibly thinner, her belly rounded. In her hand, a faded canvas bag. No more luxury coats, no more heels or designer perfume. Standing before me was a woman stripped down to her rawest self, a version of Julie Harrington no one had ever seen. "Thank you," she said, eyes red. "I know I don't deserve it." I led her down the stone path, past the newly planted garden. The guest house was clean, with running water, fresh linens, and lights already on. Before I left, I paused on the front step. "I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for the child who never got to choose any of this, and because I believe no one should be forever defined by their past mistakes." Julie nodded softly, tears falling. I turned away without another word. Back in the studio, I looked up at the reclamation painting in the center of the hall. The broken glass still reflected light as if alive. A new message echoed in me. Sometimes forgiveness isn't for others to sleep well. It's for you to finally be free. I sat down at my drafting table and began sketching for the spring exhibition. The theme this time?
rebuilding from ashes, and I knew, somewhere in the corner of that back garden, a woman was beginning her own chapter. The gate buzzer rang on a spring morning. Sunlight filtered through the tree canopy, stretching across the weathered brick walls of the Haven, now a well-regarded art restoration and exhibition center. I glanced at the security camera. The figure at the gate wore a light gray sweater and cradled a carefully wrapped painting. Her silver hair was neatly tied back, but that face, unmistakable. Mildred Harrington. I let the screen go dark and took a deep breath before speaking into the intercom. To Marcus. Let her in, but only her. She walked into the reception room with slow, measured steps. Gone was the proud tilt of her chin from years past. She set the painting on the table and gently unwrapped it, revealing an old portrait of a young woman with softly curled hair and a distant gaze. The colors had faded, and fine cracks stretched like spiderwebs across the surface. "This is my mother," she said quietly. "It's been in the attic for nearly 30 years. I forgot it was even there." I nodded, remaining silent. She continued slowly. "Ella, I know I wronged you. I dismissed your dreams. I helped push you out of this family. And when everything fell apart, I realized the only thing left standing was what was honest." I sat down across from her. "I can restore this painting," I said, my eyes tracing a crack along the frame, "but it will never be exactly the same. And that's a good thing." Mildred looked up, puzzled. "Because those cracks," I continued, "are what make it precious. The past doesn't need to be erased. It needs to be acknowledged, then rebuilt with understanding and grace." She sat in silence for a long while, then finally said, "I'm not here to ask. I'm here to learn. If you'll allow it, I'd like to work here. Administrative tasks, cleaning, taking notes, anything. I need to make something right. Not to undo the past, but to live better." I leaned back, considering, then pulled a file from the drawer. "Start Monday. Someone will train you on digital records. And this painting," I pointed to it, "is scheduled for restoration next week. But I want you involved." She nodded, and in the eyes that once held nothing but frost, I saw for the first time something deeply human: gratitude. In the days that followed, Mildred showed up consistently. No luxury car, no designer handbags, just her in a simple studio uniform, quietly entering data, dusting frames, and sometimes sitting for long moments in front of student works in progress. Julie had settled into the guest house. She enrolled in a short course on antique painting restoration, saying she wanted to understand the things I once dismissed. The baby arrived on a late weekend afternoon, a healthy boy with deep blue eyes like Brandon's, but with a far gentler gaze. Julie named him Isaac. Unexpected joy. That evening, I stood with Francisco in the main restoration studio. Sunset poured through the tall windows, casting soft light over Mildred's mother's portrait as we worked on the background. "You've changed this place," Francisco said, still gently brushing away old varnish and the people within it. I smiled, looking around at the young apprentices. Some came from top art schools, others had dropped out years ago, but all of them were focused, delicate, treating each crack as a memory to be honored. "None of us are perfect," I said, adjusting the magnifying lens. "But in learning to restore, we also learn to look at life, not to erase it, but to understand and reimagine it." Francisco nodded. "And sometimes," he added, "what was once broken becomes more beautiful than the original." That evening, I stepped into the garden. A light breeze carried the scent of newly bloomed lavender. Julie was pushing a stroller, Mildred jotting notes by the porch. Isaac slept soundly, lips curled into a soft smile, as if dreaming of a world untouched by pain. I looked up at the house, once a symbol of pressure and judgment, now reborn. Not a victory, a healing. A work of art being redrawn, not by erasing the past, but by making it more honest, more meaningful through its imperfect lines. And I knew from that moment on, I wasn't just an artist, I was a keeper of memories, and I was giving them their chance to live again in the gentlest way possible.
Ella's story is proof that the cracks in our lives don't make us weak. They're the foundation for something stronger. She turned pain into purpose, transforming a house once defined by scorn into a thriving center of creativity. In real life, we've all been dismissed or broken at some point, but when we choose to rise, heal, and build meaning from that pain, life rewards us with freedom and the deepest form of growth. What do you think about Ella's journey? Was her forgiveness a weakness or her true strength? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful stories about family and resilience.